Galym Imanbayev is a partner on our healthcare team. He's a physician by training, an adjunct professor at Stanford, and he spent years investing across healthcare IT and services. Fatemi is a partner on our consumer team, and he was an early operator at Clubhouse, one of the most viral consumer applications, and has spent many years investing. Now he spends his time on AI apps and consumer platforms. Together, they're going to walk us through one of the biggest questions in AI right now. What happens when AI stops writing the doctor's notes and starts delivering the actual care? Galym and Faraz, welcome to Lightwork. A lot of people have questions about how AI is going to disrupt healthcare. And the way I've seen it mapped out has typically been by categories, grouping them by AI voice agents, transcribing, etc. But today we have an opportunity to bring the both of you to really map it out through the actual patient journey. So very excited to have you both on here. I know you all have spent a lot of time on this space. And I think at the end of this, after we've mapped it out, we'll also spend some time talking about how the consumer experience is changing because of this. But I might actually flip it all over to you, since you have the whiteboard, to talk us through a little bit more about how AI is changing our healthcare journeys as consumers.
Today, we're going to talk through a little bit around at Lightspeed how we frame healthcare. The way that we think about it is sort of in two buckets. One is biotech, really sort of the medicines that are being used to treat patients. And the second is health tech, really the systems that are being used to pay and deliver care for patients. You know, a couple of years ago, there was a big question around whether AI is going to proliferate into healthcare. That question is gone. You know, I think today we've seen over 80% of physicians in the US have adopted healthcare into their workflows. And, you know, as we've thought about it at Lightspeed, you know, we've discreetly bucketed the opportunity across really the entire patient journey. And a lot of the opportunity we've seen as Dr. Galym Faraz, my partner, is going to walk you through, has initially started in the administrative side, but as we'll talk through today, has really started to emerge on the clinical side as well. And we're excited to share a few examples there as we dig in.
Awesome.
Take it away.
Thanks, Faraz. Thanks, Claire, Josh. So before I jump into this, oftentimes people talk about healthcare as this $5 trillion, monolith. How do you attack this industry? Ultimately, it's more than 5 trillion, and it's not just one. It's more that it's 500, potentially $10 billion industries, 50, $100 billion industries. And you can still get lost in that. I'll tell you, as investors, as I was growing up in this field, it all seemed very complicated. But at Lightspeed, we have a couple things that help us guide and keep things clear. First of all, we're deeply, deeply focused on patient impact. We think that if you drive disproportionate patient impact, value will invariably follow. That's our guiding light. And then in addition to that, one thing that pierces across all of these markets is the patient. The patient is the atomic unit of impact, both clinically, administratively. And if we get that right, we believe that we've got a differentiated view, and it gives us clarity in how we make our investment decisions. So before further ado, let's go ahead. This is you, Faraz. You start right here. First, the most important thing as a patient, there's so much of patient care that happens before a patient is even cared for. And you first need to get covered. Unfortunately, in the United States, it is something actually very important. In most countries, this is not a step, it is done. But in our country, we have to make sure you get covered, and how you get covered determines so much of downstream opportunities. We have companies such as Guide, for example, that are there to actually help you find the right insurance. That single decision could have massive impact both for your loved ones and yourself. We have companies like Evermore, for example, in this area that will determine whether you are going to be eligible for supplemental benefits, whether that can be tied to other social programs like SNAP and other things. So this is a very, oftentimes people just get started over here. This is step zero in some sense. After that, you essentially, before you even get into the traditional healthcare realm, and we'll spend some time on a company, Neko, it's essentially staying ahead. Before you get into the traditional way of healthcare, there is an entire industry that is now emerging that we believe is going to eat more and more share of this economy, in the healthcare economy, of doing things before you enter the traditional world. We're going to get back to that in a moment.
And this trend actually on the consumer side, obviously it's something that we've been discussing for probably the better part of a decade now, around how healthcare is going from being reactive to proactive. And I think companies like Neko are really leading the charge on that front.
Absolutely. So then you're moving on, and now you're entering the traditional healthcare realm. But before you even get seen, you have to actually find your care. And right now we have a number of companies, Assort and Tennr, that are helping you with that intake process. Assort, for example, is right now the leading voice AI method of you essentially finding and scheduling. And while that may seem at surface level, pretty basic, that's what everything is going to be leveling up. But the ability for folks to personalize and you leveraging AI to the intonation of your voice, these AI capabilities can now essentially alter how you interact with the provider and basically finding care faster at the right level of care with the right physician at the right time. After you're done kind of with the intake, which we believe is a very critical piece. Yeah.
For the intake process, my understanding is historically there were a lot of frictions here. Tell me or walk me through a before and after example of what life might be like pre-Assort, post-Assort.
Absolutely. I mean, this is probably something we've all faced. We've all got on the phone. Right now, 80% of all scheduling to be seen is still done by phone. We've all done that. And most of the times, there's long wait times, there's high abandonment rates. And even when you do find a skid, like this happened to my parents, happened to me, where you finally do get the care you want, you show up there, and the physician is actually not the right person for you. You actually need a specialist to see you for a particular point. And so it's just a highly, highly high friction. The patients don't like it. But the other thing that people don't realize is the providers themselves. The clinics find this extremely painful. They have lower revenues because they're placing patients at the wrong clinics and at the wrong times. So now after an Assort-like situation, what you would be essentially having is we're able to massively reduce the front office spend and labor that a clinic can have while actually increasing the NPS and increasing the right matching of the patient to the right clinician at the right time. You're increasing both patient satisfaction, clinic revenue, and it's one of these rare situations in healthcare when you get a win-win-win triple whammy. That's when we think some interesting, unique like network effects and venture potential outcomes can.
And Galym, we've spoken about this a little bit, right? Part of the whole reason, the power and promise of AI is unblocking access to healthcare and the right healthcare, right? The challenge really that a lot of these folks are tackling is the provider shortage, but there seems to actually potentially be an administrative shortage or shortfalls, at least in terms of specialized service providers. And so that's really, I think, where Assort is able to come in and really sort of streamline the process and through that be able to broaden access accordingly.
That's right. Absolutely. And Tennr, in a very similar way to Assort, also helps with intake very much on the document piece. I mean, we've all had our documents printed out, PDFs, and faxed. That's one of the things that Tennr is solving, among other things. Let's keep moving. So on Get Seen, we're going to come back to this in more depths, but this is finally you are being seen by a clinician. There are different ways to getting here, and Doctronic has probably a very disruptive, and I'll let Faraz spend more time on that, a way to get seen not only by humans, but with deep, deep AI integration that could essentially increase access by an order of magnitude. Now going on to the visit. This is in some sense, by the way, guys, these are not classical McKinsey-Meesey because there's nuance and things get overlap. But the visit can be actually be part of Get Seen, but the visit's more as a function. And the visit itself is critically important. One of our major investments, obviously, in Abridge and other companies that we've listed here. If we say the patient journey is the atomic unit of healthcare, the clinical note is like the subatomic nucleus of this atom. And what it essentially then enables is to truly understand what's all the background of the patient and turning that into a programmatized language that the rest of the healthcare system can interact. And this is when we begin to start entering from the clinical side into what I would say the core backend administrative side of healthcare. Not a lot of people talk about it. We us VCs and Claire, Josh, you guys hear ad nauseum from us about it. But more than 1.2 trillion of this 5 trillion spent in healthcare is over here. It's amazing. Over 1 trillion in administrative spend. The companies here are trying to ultimately reduce the spend. Of course, they have to make revenue, so in some ways they're increasing part of it, but in aggregate, they are reducing it. So this note enters the record, which is often an electronic medical record system. We have a company here that we're very excited to disclose at some point soon, but not quite yet. And then ultimately, this last step is when it's get paid by both to the patient journey, but also get paid for the healthcare system itself. And there's a plethora of industries called revenue cycle management. We have companies like Fathom in medical coding that translates clinical language into financial language. Signal Labs that's trying to help how do providers and payers interact so they don't get into a big AI war between each other. And then we have also some other stealth goes in the space. And the last thing I'll say, this is the patient journey. There are some companies that are trying to attempt essentially ownership of all of the functions. And I would say not functions that they build all these companies, but a company like Aledade, they are trying to essentially be the risk taker and partner and bring up all the independent physician practices to leverage all these technologies. They take risk, they partner with these clinics, and then they can leverage all these technologies essentially as a subcontract to them. So let me pause there. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of a sense of one, how we view the space, and then some of the unique paths along the journey and our bets within them.
Yeah, this is super helpful because as someone who has gone through this experience, I have faced all of these frictions, but never really mapped out all the frictions that sit in the before the visit, in the actual visit, in the record, and then obviously all the after visit of getting paid, all the stuff that happens on the back end that I don't even notice and think about. So it's really interesting to map this all out. As you're thinking about this journey, I'm curious how you're thinking about, we always talk about so much of the healthcare space is, yes, the technological innovation, but also the human friction part. So where are you seeing the most friction in this journey into implementing some of these technologies and innovations?
I would say AI and technology has had its most immediate impact in healthcare on the more right side of this journey. Basically, things that can reduce administrative spend or burden for a clinician to writing the note, or things that don't actually have direct diagnostic treatment impact. Things, how do you improve claims adjudication? These are things that are already so error prone that you improve it a little bit. There's not, lives aren't being impacted in a direct way. I would like to argue that they are. And so that's why I think it's a very important space. But also AI, as it developed, this was the areas that it could hit first. As computational capabilities move on, more and more complex and more high stakes capabilities are now being opened up. And Faraz,
I think, look, as you go further left on this earlier on in the patient journey, there's a lot of other considerations. Obviously, there's patient trust. There's a technology component. There's regulation and reimbursement as well that are evolving. These are the pieces that I think are going to take a little bit more time to mature, but these also, I think, create massive, investable opportunities for us, and why we're spending a lot of our time increasingly on the left-hand side versus, the earlier Lightspeed AI healthcare portfolio did tend to lean a little bit more administrative.
As a team, we spent a lot of time, it sounds like, as you've laid out, a lot more historically on this admin and AI layer where you're not necessarily directly touching the patient. What has gotten our team comfortable with shifting a little bit more left in this picture?
Yeah, I think it's been our experience with a set of these companies and the founders that are really leading the charge on building patient trust, building brands, sort of demonstrating once you're able to aggregate a lot of the patient data, what you can actually do with it to deliver not just care, but outcomes as well for patients. Part of it is also tied more macro to more sort of government, both at the state and federal level, acceptance and awareness of AI technology to expand access to care, which again, obviously is something that's evolving still, but we are, excited about the opportunity ahead there for sure.
Yeah, I think Faraz mentioned a very important point on terms of federal and government and regulatory points. Because Lightspeed Healthcare, the other half of our coin is on biotech. We take regulatory very, very seriously. And when we saw capabilities, raw power of computation being able to potentially do these functions, we weren't just ready to go ahead and back anybody. We were looking for teams like the team at Doctronic, the team at Neko, and a number of these that were looking at not just how raw compute can lead to high performance, but what are the guardrails? How do you work with state, federal agencies in a very tight feedback loop to do what's right for the patient? Because ultimately, look, I took the Hippocratic Oath as a physician. Do no harm is the first one, right? So technology, if you wield it in the wrong ways, of course, absolutely can do that. So I think a combination of compute capability and also the regulatory framework and the founders that think that way.
I actually want to double click on that question because I think as you all have seen so many teams try to navigate this space, I'm sure we have a lot of potential founders, existing founders who are building in the space tuning in. What do you all look for in founders building across this patient journey?
For things that are in the belly of the beast, in the administrative spend, we kind of need people. It's a tough balance where if someone doesn't know the space, it's hard to break into it. The customers are large, the payers are huge, these large big wins. So you look at folks like a Shiv at Abridge. He built an entire tribe of CMIOs as his personal following, right? And so that was the thing that was really helpful to kind of scale at that point. I would think on the clinical and the more clinical AI capability set here, it's a struggle of both someone that has to take the regulatory things, but also be spiky, willing to kind of push the edge, willing to kind of push the envelope in a safe way. Because otherwise, there are people here that are very smart, very talented, but they're not going to push it to the edge that we want.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've spent a lot of time, and we'll discuss more sort of this topic of doctorpreneurs, folks who have both capability and spike in terms of healthcare domain understanding and knowledge and network, but also, understand how technology can actually augment not just workflows, but also the patient experience. Being able to sort of have a founding team that is able to combine the two is I think incredibly important, especially as we get deeper and deeper into the clinical AI side. And at the end of the day, you need folks who also have good product sense and good understanding how to not just build multi-agent systems, but actually deliver them to the patient in a way that is going to build trust and drive incremental distribution as well.
And for the founders out there, I also think it's important to see look who's standing here, right? You got someone who lives and breathes consumer, and then I'm in healthcare. Our colleague Brenton, who is also involved in so many of these, and Shelly and the team on the more regulated biotech side. It takes us pushing ourselves, right? For us, you'll push to be like, hey, why can't we push this? And then we'll say, we don't want to always be the ones pressing kind of the brake pedal, but it's actually this tension that I think gets us to a good optimal selection.
Yeah. Speaking of this tension, I want to pivot a little bit into where I think we are seeing a lot of innovation, which is this consumer-driven healthcare journey. This map has been super helpful for me because it's given me this mental model of how to think about how technology I'm interfacing with these technologies as a consumer. This is very consumer patient centric. But I want to talk about two companies which we've invested in that are playing in this consumer healthcare space, Neko and Doctronic. Should we pivot into a deeper dive into those?
Lightspeed has made a big bet with Doctronic. But if I zoom out and look at a public markets perspectives, telehealth companies haven't traditionally done that well. You had Teladoc acquire Livongo, it didn't do well. What makes Doctronic different from those kinds of companies?
The term AI doctor is very nuanced, as we know, but in this very simplistic form, Doctronic is looking to build the AI doctor. You go to the website of the app, very similar to the way that you historically would go to Google or go to one of the telehealth platforms, put in your symptoms and sort of, try to figure out what's wrong with you. Doctronic takes it a step further. There's an entire autonomous intake flow that they've built. And then on the back end, as you move from triage through treatment, they've built this whole network for telehealth. The promise is, look, by owning intake and building this corpus of data on the patient and understanding sort of the patient journey, much in the way that we just talked through on the whiteboard, you're able to then move to an act 2, which actually moves beyond just autonomous triage to autonomous treatment over time as well. And if you think about where sort of the cost structures lie in this value chain, if you're able to deliver care, much higher margin, much lower cost to the end patient, you're not only broadening access, but you're building a business model that's very fundamentally different to what telehealth looks like historically.
Makes total sense. And there's so many inefficiencies in this area. What makes Doctronic maybe different than somebody just going to ChatGPT and putting their healthcare information in there?
Great question. So I think there's a few different pieces to it. I think one is Doctronic from day one has been built to be HIPAA compliant. Most a V1 AI systems are not. Obviously, when you're looking to build consumer trust and drive patient distribution, it is very important to ensure that you have safety and guardrails around their data. The second piece really sort of comes down to the multi-agent architecture that they've built that is multi-model and is able to pull in really the most performant sort of underlying models for each step of the patient journey and sort of able to, the routing system that they've built is able to deliver care that is empirically proven to be exceptionally high quality, and sort of those results are backed obviously with a bunch of the data points that we've published with the state of Utah with the recent pilot, showing that something like 97-98% of prescription refills in that pilot were actually deemed to be in line, concordant with what a human physician would deliver, and obviously that percentage is continuing to improve relative to base models.
Yeah, I mean that's a very exciting opportunity that patients can go and get refills from an AI doctor. What else makes you excited about this company and the space that we're building in and our thesis?
Yeah, great question. I mean, look, the headline numbers, I think, are one thing. We talk a lot about, consumer businesses and AI application businesses, and really the momentum is in a lot of ways, a moat for the company. You think about where the business is today, having done nearly 30 million AI consults, and on top of that, accelerating, direct consumer revenue, roughly 4x, almost 5x, I should say, since we led the Series B just a few months ago. And so, I think the numbers tell one piece of the story. I think what the numbers unlock with respect to the consumer brand they've built as the number one AI doctor result in Google search is one piece of it. But then really the credibility that's allowed them to accelerate their momentum on both the regulatory side with, as the aforementioned Utah pilot, really kicking off, discussions at both the state and federal level, as we were discussing. Really, regulatory is a big piece that needs to be solved as we move, earlier and earlier in the patient journey. And Doctronic really is at the forefront of that. And then the other piece of it is the momentum that's built on the B2B partnerships front across, pharmaceutical companies, digital health companies, health systems, payers, and so on. And it's really the combination of consumer momentum plus really momentum on these other vectors that really has us excited. And we obviously, as led the Series A summer of 2025. Leaned in, co-led the Series B earlier this year, and it's been just fantastic seeing the momentum ever since.
We talk a lot about defensible moats. Is the regulatory advantage going to protect them from, some of the frontier labs going in and doing the same thing?
I think the regulatory advantage is a near-term driver of distribution. Really, as we think about any, consumer or really app layer business, there's a few different levers of defensibility. First and foremost, I think it's really the brand and consumer trust that they've built that then has allowed them to start aggregating, patient data that allows them to deliver personalized care at scale with outcomes data that is, significantly more performant, to the extent that the distribution partnerships on the B2B front and the regulatory momentum allow them to further accelerate the distribution on the consumer side. That sort of spins up the flywheel that allows them to really sort of build this advantage as underlying models continue to improve and as enthusiasm in the space continues to heat up. And the reality, we talk about the opportunity to own the digital front door to healthcare. That is one of very few multi-trillion-dollar opportunities, and is ever expanding. And we think really AI in the way that it can do many of the jobs to be done for primary care physicians, we think that patient experience is fundamentally going to look different a decade from now.
Yeah, and you would think even more possibilities as you think about that front door and how it's connected to the rest of the house.
Totally. Yeah, you think about all the different services. I mean, again, we talk about the patient journey. When you move beyond just intake and triage to treatment, you think about what these systems are over time going to be capable of, whether it be ordering labs or writing prescriptions or making specialist referrals and so much more, and really becoming the one-stop shop, giving patients control back over their personal health.
I think maybe a follow-up question, just even, something I've encountered a lot of these questions just whenever I talk about AI in healthcare is this tension of what part do you automate, what part do you keep human in the loop? I think with something like an AI doctor, first question that rings in my head is, are we automating too much? How do I know that I'm getting human care at the right time? How have you thought about that tension?
The whole premise and the mission behind Doctronic is you have in the United States this massive primary care physician shortage that is continuing to actually unfortunately expand. And so to the extent that technology can serve to fill that gap and deliver care much earlier on in a patient's health journey, I think there's obviously value to that. Naturally, there's even more important, given what's at stake here, to build the right guardrails and sort of have the right safety and systems in place and make sure that really the technology that you're building has the right level of human oversight. And I think really a big part of it too is Doctronic's moat is having built these proprietary clinical guidelines that are optimized for LLM ingestion in a way that are much more human and much more mapped to really the journey that a patient would go through for a specific condition or with a specific. Over time, we feel that there's increasingly more and more of the patient journey is going to be automated. But I think, again, there's questions there around how quickly is the regulatory environment going to evolve? What are the economics of these businesses going to look like? And how are they going to change over time? These are all things that are going to be figured out in the coming years. And I think Doctronic, with the technology foundation they've built, is set up to expand further and further and deliver that care at scale.
And I think what's abundantly clear from the numbers you shared is that consumers are just looking for this optionality. They're looking for the ability to take charge in their journey. And that's why they're flocking to an option like a Doctronic and also a Neko Health. I want to pivot a little bit to Neko Health because it moves even earlier in the patient journey to part of the journey that you might not historically have categorized in a patient journey per se. Galym, why don't you tell us a little bit more about why preventative health even fits in this patient journey today?
Absolutely. Well, look, I think most of the volume of healthcare today is reactive. You have an issue, you reach out. Companies like Doctronic are making that response much faster and more accessible. And it's done digitally. In the case of Neko, it's taking the approach of let us be proactive and let us be physical, not digital. And that is a bold take, but it is one that, if you look at it from a first principles perspective, has a lot of potential. Most of, I keep always going back to this $5 trillion industry spend that we spend, right? Of that $5 trillion, yes, administrative is over $1 trillion, but over $3 trillion of it is actually in clinical services. And of those clinical services, many of them often arrive late, often with low quality of data, and oftentimes actually are not the right care to begin with. So there's a lot of waste there too. The potential of Neko, when people go online and they check it out, most people's impression and interpretation of the business is, it's a beautiful experience. You get all this, biological data about you, et cetera, and it feels good. It might even feel to people that it's kind of concierge. But from a first principles perspective, as a healthcare guy, I look at this as saying, this is a vertically integrated, multi-specialty system at a fraction of the cost, at probably at least an order of magnitude more data, and at a higher patient NPS. Combining all these things together is very, very interesting. Conscientiously, and look, this bold bet like this requires a lot of capital and a lot of resources. It took someone like Daniel Ek and Hjalmar to go ahead and put together, say, look, we're going to go into this boldly into the night. Yeah. And what that required is this vertically integrated build. They built the hardware that is within the clinic. They then generate their own data from the hardware that they themselves have designed, which then gives them proprietary AI models that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And just to give you a perspective, I think there are currently today somewhere like 50 biomarkers, but the goal is orders of magnitudes of that. And that is what gets me excited. And hopefully that framing gives you a different sense of just what the outside in from the branding one could look and what it kind of looks like as an engine from the inside.
Yeah, I love the way you frame that, because I think when people look at Neko, it's easy to just see the scan part and it's flashy and cool, but really viewing this as, a vertically integrated preventative health company that has both that software layer and hardware layer. I actually told Josh this, but I visited Neko a couple months ago, and I did get that 300-pound. I did it in London. It's coming to New York soon. I did it in London, but 300 pounds only. And I just felt so empowered by that data. And I recognize I think there are very valid questions around self-diagnosis and, users obsessing with too much data. And I'm curious for your thoughts on that. But at least for me, I felt like it was empowering to know that I could get longitudinal data points at that when I maybe went to a Doctronic healthcare experience or any other part of that patient journey. I could come equipped with so much more data points because it feels like, at least my sense is, everything you've laid out feels like these single checkpoints and nobody's really piecing together a unified profile of a patient. What do you feel like this will unlock in terms of behavioral change? Or, if we get the preventative Neko Health vision right, what do you think that will unlock downstream for the rest of the journey that you laid out?
First of all, the bar is very low. Like when a patient, I'll use my parents as an example, when they have all their data from multiple specialists, various primary care, so on and so forth, it's hard for them to even interact with it already. And I've already created cloud projects for each of my parents, right? Like that is where all their data lives.
In a lot of ways, it's hard to even access the data. I think
Exactly.
it's there's a question of what do you do with it, but there's a question also how do you even get it in the first place? And
Well, especially when you're across so many different health systems too, right? They all have a different login and your information's in these different portals and it's all locked away and you can't put it in one place today.
Exactly, Josh. So because if that's the status quo, that means the critical mass of data one needs to be viewed as like the sun that which pulls gravity of everything towards it is actually not that high. I'll tell you even an example like function health for us. I started using it for biomarker. Just because I use it once, the next time I'm like, all right, I'll use it again, right? But that's just blood work. Neko provides, I think, a really unique combination of not only blood work as well, but like a very physical and experiential combination, whereas others could just be ordering labs, so on and so forth. When you combine that with a consumer element of like, loyalty towards an experience, and by the way, like those are like basic points that will essentially form as the gravity for all your health data. But then after that, like I've had a chance to speak with the members of the technical team at Neko, and it is I get goosebumps a little bit because yes, they'll do the traditional things to make sure all your downstream healthcare people understand the data, but they're pushing the envelope. They want to develop biomarkers that are actually going to generate new IP, and that is going to, I think, bring even more value to the company. And the last thing I'll say is, I see a future that, it's not that it's going to work in totally in isolation of the rest of the healthcare system. I see a future that when a Neko patient arrives to a specialist or to a surgeon, they will look at their list of patients coming in and they'll say like, "Ooh, that's a Neko patient," and they will smile. And the reason they'll smile is because their data is going to be packaged so nicely. It'll come with recommendations, and it'll be a much more informed patient interaction for the traditional healthcare if that patient has been taken care of Neko. So that's my hope, and I think they'll get there soon.
That's really exciting because I think the follow-up question I was going to ask was, how do you view all of these companies that you laid out, especially something like a Doctronic and a Neko that both have such impact on consumers directly? How do you view them feeding into each other, even in an ideal world?
Well, it depends. These companies all move in different ways. Who knows? But right now, if you want to be seen by a clinician in whatever, what are your SLAs? Very, very short period of time. There you go, less than 15 minutes. I'd say go Doctronic.
All 50 states.
If you want a comprehensive kind of preventive solution that you take year in, year out, obviously that is kind of with its unique IP, obviously that's Neko.
Look, I think again, it's all about aggregating patient data and giving control back to the patient and consumer, and really, I think it's two sides of the same coin, right? It's the autonomous front door to healthcare that Doctronic is owning, and then it's the preventative frontier that Neko is looking to build.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I'm just excited. I've been a beneficiary, a patient that's been empowered by these offerings, and I'm excited to continue to see it evolve. Last question for you both, since you all have this very unique window into the space. What should founders and operators be paying attention to? Are there any opportunities or windows you feel like people are not building in right now, or not as much attention is focused on those spaces?
So yeah, look, my lens is going to come at this from a consumer data access and data aggregation lens, but I think there's a real opportunity, much in the way that we've seen historically financial data aggregators like a Mint.com giving you control over your financial picture and then allowing you to sort of derive not just financial value but really sort of economic value from it. Is there a way where somebody can build the interface to then go and aggregate all this different patient health data that exists in different silos, centralize it, and then give you control over it so that you can, again, derive not just health outcome benefit from it, but also potentially, derive economic value? And obviously, Galym, this is something that we've discussed. How valuable is that data to the end patient, and what are the mechanisms for giving control back to that patient?
No, that's a great point. Yep, we've discussed that. My take to you guys' question would be, I'm really curious, and I would love to see activity in the space of how we're continuing pushing the envelope of capability of clinical AI. And what I mean by that is, there is on the spectrum of, initially we started with AI doing interpretive work. Then we've got consultative. Soon we should start getting into procedural and ultimately potentially into surgical. So right now it's all digital, it's all in interpretive sense, it's imaging, it is, look at my data and I'll give you a recommendation, a diagnosis. But I think I would love to see where we start hitting the physical world. And as that is still kind of the final frontier, but the inputs and outputs of what a surgeon does and the inputs of images and the outputs of 5 fingers, to me seems, or 10 fingers, ideally, then you certainly could start to see a world where you can do that. Neuralink is one of our investments that is doing that in the CNS realm, but even from all general surgery and above, I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, you think about how revolutionary Da Vinci robots were when they came out, and fast forward today, you look at both the software capabilities and the robotic hardware capabilities in 2026. How much more revolutionary is this next generation of surgical robotics and care delivery in the physical sense going to look like? I think it's going to completely change the patient experience.
I love it. I am feeling so energized off of this conversation, and it sounds like if there are any founders out there building these spaces, they should reach out.
Yeah. Thank you, Galym, and thank you, Faraz, for joining us on Lightwork.
Take care.